And Brandon, you've missed absolutely nothing. We haven't even officially started. So welcome, everyone. The first time we ever did this was an AMA back in April. Actually, though, that's not true because I looked at the old video and that was just me reading questions that people had submitted. So I guess the first time we really did the live chat was in October of last year. So I think this is a good thing to do, you know, at least twice a year, if not 2 or 3 times a year. Let everybody get together and share ideas and ask questions and bring topics to discuss. So I hope you all brought things that you want to know about and that you like to hear me ramble on about. And it's pretty informal. So you don't have to keep yourself muted. If you have something you want to say, then you can turn off the mute and say what you want to say. And we'll have a discussion here. So that's about it. Welcome, folks. And who here brought some discussions they'd like to talk about, questions that you'd like to ask? We'll just jump right into it.
I'm super excited that you're doing this, Aaron. And I would even go as far as, I don't know if you could fit it in, but even once a month, I'd be game to do this. Can you elaborate on like the historical validity of the Christ figure or of Jesus? There's a book by Lon DeCat called Accidental Christ I'm looking for at a reasonable price. And there's similar books as well that talk about the Gnostic Christ. And I'd just like to know more about that.
Yeah, so the essential question is the validity of a historical Jesus figure. I think that, well, I think there's a very good chance that in this case, we're dealing with someone who probably existed, like less so than, say, Moses. I figure Moses, the entire Exodus story, is probably the combination of several different stories. So what we know as Moses is probably several different people. Who we know as King Solomon, probably several different people. You know, just like with the King Arthur situation.
Maybe Solomon.
Well, actually, no, not quite like King Arthur. Yeah, at least we know a King Arthur existed. We don't even really know for sure if a Solomon existed or if a Moses existed. I figure likely, probably not. They're probably more amalgamation figures. But at least in the case of Arthur, then we do know that a person existed. And that's what I think is similar to the Jesus story. I do think there was a guy named Jesus. Did you ever read the old book, Holy Blood, Holy Grail?
No, not in particular.
Okay, that was a big thing in the 90s. And it's largely a lot of unsupported conspiracy theory stuff. So I'm not really recommending the book as a historical document. But I do think there were some gems to be found in the author's thesis. By the way, Holy Blood, Holy Grail is what was largely the basis for Dan Brown's Da Vinci Code. So basically, what you saw in the Da Vinci Code was a fictionalized action story based on Holy Blood, Holy Grail. And so I do think there were a couple of gems in the original book there. And one of their thesis was that Jesus, oh, hang on, I've got to let someone else in here. Was that Jesus was kind of a revolutionary guy who was trying to reestablish the Hebrew monarchy that was founded by David and Solomon. So there's a lot more they saw in the Gospels. They saw them more as like war propaganda. They were actually fomenting a Jewish revolution for the time that they were written. Which would have been when Rome was in charge of the Holy Land. So I do think there was a guy, and probably several guys, but I do think there was a Jesus who was running around, starting trouble, who got himself arrested by causing a big scene at the temple, overturning tables and you know, lashing people with whips. And so he got arrested and strung up for it. But I also agree. You know, like they have the hypothesis of the book. You heard the book of Q, and I don't mean QAnon. I mean the old book of Q. It's a hypothetical book of proverbs and saying. It's a theoretical book that may have been a source for some of what Jesus says in the New Testament.
Right.
And I think that kind of thing would go on. I do think that Jesus' story was clearly mythologized, turned into legend. And like I said, when it goes back to the Holy Blood, Holy Grail thing, I do think there was a lot of kind of rebel propaganda involved in it. So, it's a little from A and a little from B. So when you get into like the cosmic Christ and the Gnostic Christ, the Christ as a magician and all of that stuff, I think most of that probably descends more from the legends that built up around him, the miracles he performed and that kind of thing. I think even the story itself hints at a mystery tradition. They say Christianity started with Jesus, but how can that be true when St. John the Baptist gave him the title of Christ? It was obviously clearly already a title he could earn in some tradition that is not made clear in the Bible, because Jews don't baptize. So when he went to St. John the Baptist, he was doing something completely outside of Judaism. Not that Judaism is unfamiliar with baptism, but that's not something they commonly, do now or at the time that Jesus lived. So yeah, there was a lot of stuff going on there. So I think there's an historical thread, there's a legendary thread, and there's mystical
Yeah.
threads that got added on top
The
of that,
whole-
and huge mixed bag. Yeah.
Now that
So that's
reminded
my
me,
thoughts on that.
I could be wrong, but one of the three Hebrew codes, Tamora, Gematria, and Otarikon, one of those, and I'm not going to be able to call this out the top of my head, but one of those I think can be used to, it's the tetragrammaton is found in the word Jesus, right? With one of those codes.
Well, it's sort of. Jesus' real name was Joshua, and it does not actually completely make the tetragrammaton. That was more of a thing of the Christian Kabbalah, like just before and during the Renaissance.
So that was them
They
trying
wanted to
get
kind
it.
of legitimize.
Okay.
Yeah, there is a Joshua. You can spell it so that it kind of looks like it almost wants to be the tetragrammaton with a sheen in the middle. But that's not exactly the accurate way to spell Joshua in Hebrew. So you have to fudge the name a little bit, and then you get Yeshua, which even to this day is, a very highly revered divine name. But no, it's a product of the Christian Kabbalah of the early Renaissance era, rather than something that actually comes from. It's not the basis of Jesus's actual name in the Bible.
So with like your Gnosticism as a Gnostic priest, how do you, like, with Kundalini and the Holy Spirit, how are they related? Like, what purpose does it serve? Are they related in any way, Kundalini and the Holy Spirit? Is it connected, or?
Well, okay, the thing is, I gotta say right off the top, I can't say that I'm an expert on Kundalini, so I can't really get into the details on that. But from what I understand of it, it is what they call a psychosexual force. It is an energy that generates like at the base of your spine, I think, and it's supposed to move up from there. And I would, if my understanding of it is correct, that is not the same as the Holy Spirit. It's the Holy Spirit is more akin to what we call lux, light, divine light, and it comes from the top down. We have to explain it this way a lot when people are being taught the middle pillar, because it's clear that the practice of the middle pillar, really the old Golden Dawn used all 10 spheres, so it's a little wrong to call it the middle pillar, but what came to be the middle pillar is obviously influenced by Eastern practices and the idea of the chakras. But rather than starting at Yesod, foundation, and moving this energy up the spine to Kether, you start at Kether and you're calling this light down into the spine. So I think they're very different forces, and I don't think they're related, except in so far as they're both life energy. But it seems to me Kundalini is more physical, more visceral, whereas Lutz is something kind of like from the outside that you're calling in, and it's this purifying life energy. It's not as visceral. It's just pure light.
So is that the same as the
I think
Kabbalistic
that's
cross
the
concept?
the famous what now?
The Kabbalistic cross, when you call down and you go down and you bring down, is that this sort of thing, the Holy Spirit, in that sense?
Yeah, exactly. It's the exact same thing. It's Luke's. So you're calling now. When you get to the point of calling it Holy Spirit, you really getting into a more refined concept. It's very related, because anything from above, especially above the celestial realm, is just white light, and that's what you're calling down with the Lukes. But just with the Holy Spirit, it's more of a personage. You have Gnosticism, you have the Christos, and you have Sophia, and they're the father and mother, and their child is the Holy Spirit. So when you get the Holy Spirit, you're getting the mother and the father in one entity, one being. You'll see the old alchemical images of the king and queen bound together as one, and some even label it as Christos Sophia, and that is the Holy Spirit. That is the combined. Whereas with Luke's, it's more of just a generic force. It's just calling pure light without naming it, without putting any kind of personality or attribute to it. So similar, but not exactly the same. And that all that applies to the middle pillar too. It's just pure white Luke's. So what else we got today?
I don't want to ask all the questions, so if anyone wants to speak over me, just take over, they can. In a previous interview, you had mentioned how upon accomplishing Abramelin, it's a lot like Robert Anton Wilson's book, Prometheus Rising. And you said you felt like internal changes in your personality compared to how with Timothy Leary re-imprinting the circuits, he would use LSD, and that basically just resets your whole entire nervous system and how you were imprinted on each circuit. And then that allows somebody to, I guess, reselect what they want to imprint on or not. Now, if Abramelin is like that, how does Gnostic pathworking affect the circuits or affect your nervous system?
Now, I want to be sure I understand your question. So you're saying that if Abramelin does that, if that affects like the circuits of imprint vulnerability psychologically, then what? What is the second part of that question exactly?
How does the guided pathworking meditations and the Golden Dawn, the OTO, that every tradition and lineage tends to have, the guided pathworkings, how do those affect you in your nervous system?
Well, I mean, my gut reaction is to say the same way, but I don't want to say that and give the impression that it's, quote, the same thing as Abramelin. I mean, Abramelin is its own specific process with a specific goal, which is bonding, to your skull, that holy guardian angel.
It's quite more elaborate.
Who, by the way, is the Holy Spirit. Talking about, yeah. But now with the Golden Dawn, I've often considered, but I keep stepping back away from it, but taking Leary's 8-circuit model and applying it to the grades of the Golden Dawn. So you would have like your first circuit would be associated with your zealoter, or maybe even the neophyte initiation. And then, your second circuit would be, I guess if neophyte was first circuit, your second circuit would be your zealoter experience. And then on up, I don't think I could ever really get it to get a perfect one-on-one correspondence with the grades, which is why I keep not doing that essay. But I think there was, as I went up through the grades in the Golden Dawn, I did feel each of those circuits being hit. So I know there was a time when I was knocked all the way back to my first circuit, and very, very lost in the darkness. There's a lot of that symbolism, especially in the neophyte. You're lost and wandering in the darkness. You're afraid. You're searching for a light, for something to reach for. And I felt that. I definitely went back there, and I had to do a lot of re-imprinting. With the typical American late 20th century bad upbringing, a lot of things had to be wiped clear and re-imprinted. And it just went on from there. You can feel your like when you start getting up into your fourth circuit, there was a lot of havoc played there. Third circuit, your intellectual sphere, definitely, because of all the book study that you do and learning all the correspondences. That's all literally, when you study correspondences like that, especially as much as you have to in a system like the Golden Dawn, you are physically adding new wires into your brain. You are connecting synapses that were not connected before. So, as you learned that red means fire, but also Mars. Mars is related to Scorpio. Scorpio is related to these concepts. Mars is related to this array of concepts, and everything is just this branching tree of information. And you pack all that into your head, and this actually creates a whole new brain that you didn't have before. So that's what the Golden Dawn meant by being more than human. So yeah, I mean, there's no doubt that going up through the grades really does affect each stage, especially if you're aware of those 8 circuits of imprint vulnerability, and you can recognize when the system has kind of shoved you down into one of them to break your old habits and your old imprints and add, like you said, fresh programming, stuff that you want to put there rather than whatever your parents or teachers or preachers or whatever put in your head as a kid. And so that, yeah, it was a hell of an experience. But I did Abramelin first. So I had a lot of my old habits and stuff broken even before I went into the Golden Dawn. It was just that after I did Abramelin, one of the first directives my angel gave me was, hey, you live about an hour and a half from Chicken Tabitha Cicero. Go meet them. And I said, okay. So I went over and met them, and that was over 20 years ago, and here we are. So definitely Abramelin is similar, but not the same, or else my guardian angel would not have immediately sent me there. So
how did that message come from your HGA? Was it like an impulse or a dream, or did you audibly hear it?
God, it's been so long ago, and she's communicated with me in all of those ways. Not so much with dreams, which is weird because I do sometimes have meaningful dreams, but she's never bothered to appear in one. I think that one was more of kind of a cross between a direct message and an impulse. Like it was a direct message. It might as well have been as clear as if I heard it, but I can't say there were actual words involved. So I think it was just an idea she just impressed directly on me. It was go, because I was very hesitant, and it wasn't hesitant to meet Chicken Tabitha. I wanted to go do that, but when it came to actually joining the order and thinking that I'm going to dedicate part of myself and my freedom as a solitary practitioner to become part of this organization, and is it worth it? Is it safe? Can I trust these people? Can I operate with someone in an organization that has a hierarchical structure where I'll have people in charge, and my guardian angel is the one who broke that tie with that message. But it wasn't in English. It was just go do that, and I just knew what she wanted me to do. So it's hard to describe sometimes.
So with the circuits and stuff, if you do an invocation, so you invoke, say, a being within you and you go through partial possession, what effect would that have on the circuits? Can you evolve like through doing it that way instead of doing pathworkings? Can you go through possession in that sense?
Okay, one nitpick, I got to be pedantic, and I'm sorry, but invocation does not mean calling an entity into you. I always call that possession. Invocation just means prayer. So, yeah, and the only reason I'm so hard on that is because so much of my public persona is centered around the Solomonic thing, and invocation was never used in those old texts to mean possession. It's easier to make that point clear, especially when I'm talking about the old magic that used invocation just to mean prayer. But okay, so enough of that. Can the now you almost had me do it. Can the possessions, the ritual possessions of, say, archangels, your holy guardian angel, and even other entities affect the 8 circuits? Absolutely. If you read Secrets of the Grimoires in chapter 3, I go over the 8 circuits, and I kind of explain where if you read Prometheus Rising, by the way, anyone listening who's not familiar with what we're talking about with the 8 circuits, get the book Prometheus Rising by Robert Anton Wilson. Basically, Timothy Leary came up with an 8 circuit model of human consciousness. They're not so much physical circuits, although they do involve physical imprinting in the brain, but it's 8 points in your life where you're most susceptible to imprinting. So when you're firstborn, when you're a toddler, when you first learn to talk and then finally read and interpret language and symbols. Later on, when you hit puberty, is a massive imprint vulnerability. So Timothy Leary created this, and there's 8 circuits in total. And then Robert Anton Wilson wonderfully explained these 8 circuits in Prometheus Rising. And Prometheus Rising also has wonderful exercises and all sorts of other things packed in there. So it's almost like a course you can follow. I highly, highly recommend it. So that said, to catch everybody up, in Secrets of the Grimoires, I also explain the 8 circuits, but I'm explaining them as an occultist, as a magical practitioner. So you're getting a little bit of a different take on them. And I actually explain where spirits and gods and our human ability to connect into their spiritual realm and communicate with them. I explain where that fits into the 8 circuit model. And it's basically, as I said before, you've got your first circuit imprint, which is when you're first born. That is nothing more than fight or flight instinct kind of thing. So you retreat away from what is noxious and frightening, and you are attracted to what is warm and comforting. So you retreat from darkness and cold and loud noises as an infant, but you go toward mother's breast and mother's arms. Second circuit is where you're toddling around and you learn that, hey, this older brother of mine can push me down, but I'm big enough to push down this younger brother of mine. And so you learn your pecking order in a hierarchical monkey structure of society. Third circuit is where you learn to read and write and gain actual kind of self-awareness for the first time. Fourth circuit, like I said, is puberty. That's where you get your moral sense, what's right, what's wrong. When you hit the 5th circuit, this is what is accessed like when you smoke marijuana and use other drugs that shift your consciousness. So whenever you gain these insights, when you get inspiration, when you communicate with spirits, all of these things come through what Leary and Wilson would have called the 5th circuit. Then when you get to the 6th circuit, you're starting to get really high conceptual stuff. The 6th circuit is where, now I can be corrected at any point, so refer to Secrets. It's been years since I wrote this, but I seem to remember saying that the 6th circuit is where you would actually go and meet the gods. So if you're practicing a system where you leave your body and go out into the astral and go face to face with spiritual entities, you're on the 6th circuit when you do that. And then 7th circuit is like a step above, like, direct contact with the creator himself. And then 8th circuit is like almost an Eastern concept of complete attainment and complete universal consciousness. So yes, the entities that we work with, not only do they affect the circuits, your imprint circuits, and can be part of that process of breaking down the old imprints and creating new ones, but they actually have a place in that circuit structure where they fit. And that is the answer to your second question. Can you just do the ritual possessions like in lieu of the other workings, your path workings and your hermetic work and that kind of thing, and your initiatory work? The answer is no. And the reason is because those gods and spirits are up there on the 5th and 6th circuits, and you need to do the work on those lower circuits before you can ever contact them properly on those higher circuits. So this kind of goes back to that Golden Dawn system being related to the circuits. You start way back on the first circuit in Neophyte, and you are re-imprinted on each circuit as you move up the tree of life. And then, according to the way the system is designed, then when you go into the inner order, now you're ready to start talking to spirits and doing 5th, 6th, and later on, maybe even 7th and 8th circuit level work. So
I have a real quick, simple
yeah,
question.
ladies.
On the Kabbalah, when you're
Yes.
summoning your angels or entities, on the Kabbalah, Archangel Michael is always associated with Had, but yet I've had so many other people say, well, he's associated with the sun and you should bring him on Sunday. Sometimes I'll see people interchange and bring both Raphael and Archangel Michael on Sunday or Wednesday. I always invoked him on Wednesday and seen him as the spirit of Mercury. What are your thoughts on that?
This comes up a lot. And if you're in the Solomonic group, there's actually been a couple of posts about it where we go into detail. But essentially, if you look in the old grimoires, the entities of the sun and Mercury switch a lot. And that's because Mercury and the sun are ridiculously similar planets. Even in the solar system, well, and in astrology, but even in the physical solar system, Mercury is always right there next to the sun. I call Mercury the sun's mini-me. So it's just like a little sun whipping around the bigger sun and being a real pain in the butt because he keeps going retrograde and he's a trickster and he causes a lot of problems that the sun doesn't. But so he's really like mini-me, a little annoying guy. And no offense to Raphael or Mercury, but it is, he can be a real pain sometimes. Just Loki's a mercurial entity. So in the literature, they share so many traits, even though there are differences where Mercury is a trickster and a liar and a thief and a juggler and a con man and all, and a DJ and a car salesman. And the sun is a king, a royal person. It's very regal. He's very proud. So there's your differences. But yet they both represent knowledge and wisdom. They both, represent light and prosperity and life. And so there's just so many things. Both of them are associated with medicine, by the way. Michael is as much an angel of healing as Raphael is. So you'll find them in the literature. They switch a lot. Some sources put Raphael with the sun and Tiferet and Michael in Hod and Mercury. And then some sources have that switched where like in the Heptameron, the Heptameron has Michael as the angel of the sun and Sunday. And that's the way I work with them, as the angel of the sun. So now the way the Golden Dawn went about that, they love to nail every square peg into every round hole. They just decided that the angels of the Sephiroth were a different set than the angels of the planets. And there is some merit to that view. So they just took the version of the 7 archangels that has Michael in Hod, or I should say in Mercury. They put that on the tree of life. So they put Michael in Hod. And then they took the Heptameron list of angels and made them the angels of the planets. So there you get a switch. So it entirely depends. Like if you want to work with Raphael, you can work with him as Raphael Tiferethiel. So he'll be there you'll be getting him in his aspect as the archangel of Tifereth. You can work with him as Raphael Shemeshiel, archangel of the sun. You can work with him as Raphael Hodiel or Raphael Kokabiel, with him as Raphael Ruachiel, which would make him the archangel of the air and the east. So each one of those is Raphael, but it's him operating under a different aspect. In the ATRs, they would call that a path. Everyone is a different path of Raphael. So did that just about cover it, or did I?
Yes.
Did I leave you even more perplexed?
No, I think it does. And the funny thing is that I find about these paths with angels is I have a lot more knowledge with Orisha and African magic, a lot more in depth, and the Orishas also. I'll find a lot of commonalities between those two beliefs, where Orisha will have many paths, like a Legua, a Shu will have 21 paths, and they'll come out in different aspects. So it's very interesting how both of these concepts are similar. I find the similarities between them.
Yeah, they are very similar. A lot of what you find in Secrets of the Grimoire was based on, it was all written right as I was discovering the similarities between, especially the old magic. I mean, it's true even in the Golden Dawn and the modern systems, but less so than it is in, say, the Grimoires, which the Grimoires basically represent a European white man's version of exactly the same things they're doing in the ATRs, in Santeria, in Voodoo. If you look at the Goetia, not just the book itself, but Goetia as a practice, it's almost identical with what they're doing in Voodoo. You know, and then you look at the more angelic systems, they're a lot more similar to what's going on in, say, Santeria, where the African material mixed with Catholicism. So there's a lot more altars and icons and that kind of thing. You know, with the pots that the Orishas live in and stuff, and beautifully decorated altars and stuff. So yeah, there's just so much of a correlation between, and it's not just the African stuff, really. It's any ancient. I mean, if you look at, I mean, I've talked to people who are practicing Native American shamanism, people who are practicing Strega, and you know, the old traditional witchcraft over in Italy. These systems are all basically similar, and it's because it doesn't matter where you come from, east or west, north or south, whatever country, whatever time, spirits are spirits. And while there's always going to be cultural differences between the way all of these systems work, there's still a commonality. I mean, there are still things you have to do in order to get spirits to work with you, in order to take care of them and give them power and strength and foundation in order to do work for you. You know, to build your spiritual army and make connections with the forces of nature. You know, nature isn't different in China than it is over here. So yeah, we're always going to find those commonalities with real magic, which is why you guys see me sometimes turn into a real asshole on Facebook when it comes to magic, because you know, people want to say that there are no commonalities, there are no universals, that it's all just made up. We can do whatever we feel is right, and that's all that matters. And that's just not what history shows. History shows that there are practices and there are mysteries that have been around for thousands of years, and they've developed over thousands of years, and it's because they work, and they work no matter your time or place, black or white, European or indigenous or whatever. If you're talking to another magician who really works with spirits and not just a fantasy made up system, then you're going to be able to talk shop with them. You'll recognize the things they say, and it'll be clear that they're practiced in the art. And if they're not, if they're just BSing, that's going to be clear too. And that's when you start getting into arguments with people. Because if you're like me and you're a hot-headed Celt, I don't, a lot of my career as an author has been based on the fact that I don't like it when people use occultism to take advantage of others, because, well, I can just make up anything I want to say and it's right by default, and therefore you can't say different. Meanwhile, I'm selling you books, I'm selling you classes, I'm offering you life coaching. And, you know, if I'm just making it all up to suit myself, how do I have any right to do that? And so, you know, I guess rather than joining, what was his name, Randy, who did all the debunking, rather than joining that crowd and debunking occultists, I just decided to go the other way and just not tolerate when I hear people talking who clearly don't know what they're claiming to know. And I'm sorry, that was a total tangent. I have no idea why I went down that line, but it just explains a little of my weird behavior on Facebook sometimes when I lose my patience. But when you see me lose my patience and go off, and it's because of that universality. It's because I know when someone's talking and they've actually worked with spirits. It's like, it doesn't matter your nationality. If you are talking to someone who works with big cats, you're going to know you're talking to someone who has actually worked with physical big cats and dealt with them and know the safety precautions and cleaned up, their droppings and their messes and fed them and cared for them. And you're going to be able to tell the difference between that and somebody who just thinks that taking care of big cats is no different than taking care of house cats. And they've read a couple of articles online and they watched The Tiger King, and therefore they're experts on taking care of big cats. And I'm very willing to call those guys out and go, no, sorry. Thank you for your contribution, but that has nothing to do with taking care of a big cat. So